This is another episode of Standup Comedy, your host and MC, celebrating 40-plus years on the fringe of show business. Stories, interviews, and comedy sets from the famous and not so famous. Here's your host and MC, Scott Edwards.
Hey everybody, welcome to this week's show. I am so excited to be sharing this with you. The interview with Tom Sawyer, the owner and booker for Cobb's Comedy Club for over 2 decades in San Francisco, is my interviewee this week. But we had so much in common and such a great conversation. Well, it took a long time. So what I've done is broken it down to 3 segments. If you're enjoying it, keep listening. You'll get a lot out of all 3. Listen to 1, see what you think, anything you want to do. But I just wanted to tell you I'm excited about this interview with Tom Sawyer from Cobb's Comedy Club in San Francisco. And here's part 1. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the podcast. We have something very fun and special for you today. You know, I say that every week, but this week it's extra special. There's a gentleman that's been in the business as long as I have. We've had kind of parallel lives. He started off as a stand-up comic, ended up being a club owner. There's the connection. But on top of that, he's a movie producer and currently a voice artist. It's so exciting to have him on the show. The man that brought Cobb's Comedy Club to the San Francisco area, one of the legendary clubs in the North Bay area. So exciting to have him on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Tom Sawyer.
Oh, thank you. Well, there's the audience. Thank you very much, Scott, and a real pleasure to be on your show, and thank you for having me.
Oh, well, it's just so exciting because, you know, we actually met a couple times, but it was back in the early 80s when you were just getting started at Cobb's. But let's kind of catch the audience up. You started off as a stand-up comic, correct?
Yeah, that's why I actually came to San Francisco from Rhode Island to Florida to San Francisco.
And what age were you kind of dipping your toes in the stand-up comedy world?
I did it where I could in Florida. There weren't a lot of places to do it. I did a lot of theater when I was in Florida. I also hung out at New College in Sarasota, Florida, when it's getting a little bit of flack and a little bit of press right now in Florida. But that was a great hippie school and had no theater department. I made friends with a student there through a play and ended up loving the place. Though I never became a student, I did start an improv group there. I did DJ at the college station. I put on parties. I directed plays. I started plays over there, and it had no theater department whatsoever. It was they were very creative plays, and I took total advantage of it. And
well, I think it's the first time I've heard of somebody going to college that wasn't actually going to college, but used it as a commercial base. That's awesome.
Yeah. I had a professor actually ask me what I was doing for my thesis. And I said, how to trick everybody into believing you're a student but 10 people.
Well, that's great. And all that experience on the stage, you fell into stand-up comedy. I know that we're going to be jumping to Cobb's in a little bit in San Francisco, but you were doing stand-up. Was it something you were driven to? Did you just enjoy the audiences and the accolades and the laughter? Or was it kind of an extension of the improvisation you were doing in theater?
I was always, I was always a class clown. So, I was always the kid in the back of the room making everybody in the front of the room laugh. And so it was a natural transition for me to want to go into stand-up. And San Francisco was the place where it was happening. And I had a friend that was going there, and I said, can I tag along? And we did a cross-country trip. And I fell in love with San Francisco. That was like the day I got there. I knew this was my home.
Yeah, it used to be such a beautiful, wonderful city. And the fact that you were absolutely correct, back in the 70s and early 80s, a real hotbed for stand-up comedy. It was just becoming an emerging art form. There was a few clubs in L.A., a few in San Francisco, a couple in Boston, and back in New York. But as you mentioned, even in Florida, there wasn't a lot of comedy club exposure in, let's say, 79 to 82, which I think you started getting involved with Cobb's, right?
Yeah, it was like late 81. I actually started as producer in 82, but in like 81, I was out there and basically did the rounds of the clubs, realized everybody was packed. You know, it was so difficult getting stage time. And there was this little place on Chestnut Street in the Marina District in San Francisco that was trying to do stand-up Cobb's Pub. And you'd go there and you'd get like crazy stage time, but no audience. Everybody else is packed. There's like 20 people half asleep at Cobb's Pub, but you'd get a bunch of stage time. In fact, you'd get too much stage time sometimes because you'd be on stage until another comic showed up, and you'd go on stage, and the same thing would happen again. And then you're 10 minutes into material that you don't have anymore, and you're going, "Hey, where are you from?" And the audience is all like, "Hey, the last guy just did the same thing. Everybody knows where everybody's from here. So why don't you come up with something else?"
That is so funny. And yet at the same time, I bet it was a great crucible for building yourself as a comic, learning who you were. That whole part of learning to interact with an audience is so important. What type of comedy were you doing? Was it perspective, self-deprecation, prop? I don't know anything about your comedy
I was just
set.
trying to fit in. So most everybody at that point was trying to be Robin Williams and being esoteric. I'm going to be esoteric. I'm going to say things that'll make sense. And so everybody was trying to be like goofy and esoteric, which is kind of against my grain. I'm more sarcastic and observational, but I wanted to fit in. So that's what I was doing. And, as I say in the documentary, The Comedy Club, which is out on Amazon and Tubi and Plex, all those places, I was not a good comedian. In fact, Paula Poundstone said I stunk, and she was right. I was really bad. But I was really bad because I wasn't being myself. I was trying to fit in. I was trying to get appreciation from the other comedians, and I wasn't being myself. And that became my mantra later on when I was mentoring comics: be yourself, because nobody can steal that from you. Nobody can take that from you. And that's where you're gonna find the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, in truly being yourself.
No, and that's such great advice, and I'm glad that you learned it, and then as a club owner, you pass it on many, many times, I'm sure. I used to do the same when I was helping young comics. Being yourself is truly the way to find your comedic voice and relate to the audience. If you're yourself, the audience will accept that and work with you. And yes, we'll be doing some good size plugs for your movie. But if you didn't catch it, ladies and gentlemen, it's called The Comedy Club. It's out on Freezy, Amazon, several other places. But The Comedy Club is a great documentary on a tragic time for you. But before we get to that, let's go back to you getting started. So you're a stand-up comic. You kind of suck. You're hanging out at Cobb's.
No, I didn't kind of suck. I sucked.
I'm trying to be polite. So
I had a couple good sets. I bombed quite a bit.
Well, that's how I tell everybody that's the best way to learn. If you don't bomb, or much like in business, if you don't go bankrupt, you're not really successful. So it's late 81, 82. What came about that you started? Did you actually take over Cobb's or just started booking? Tell the story.
Well, I was, I basically hung out at Cobb's the most because that was the most stage time you could get. So it didn't make any sense to me to play to a similar sized crowd that at 1 o'clock in the morning at the Punchline, at the Punchline or the other cafe or the Holy City Zoo. It made a lot more sense to be, prime time with the same size crowd, but at Cobb. So I spent a lot of time there and got to know the owner and, got to know everybody that was hanging out. The producer at the time was John Cantu. And no offense to John, but John was very he had his crew, a small group of comics that he would book repeatedly over and over again. And I just kept telling the owner what was going to happen before the show started, and how it was going to fail. And then talking to him late at night, we're hanging around saying, I think I could do a better job. I think I could bring in comics in here that nobody's bringing in. We can really make this place happen, and without really putting any extra expense in the club. And, he said, how are you going to do that? Well, I said, well, give everybody a percentage of the door. Give them a chance at the brass ring. They put asses in the chairs, they'll be rewarded for it. And that's what we did. When the owner, Ron Kikiki, the former owner, let me take over, we put that into action.
Well, it was a good move because Cobb's became a premier comedy location for many decades. But it was, you mentioned a couple things. First off, the owner was Ron Kiki, and he ended up working with you. At that point, hired you to book, and you replaced John Cantu. And for those that don't know the history, John was a big-time booker in the Bay Area, but he and I butted heads. He wasn't the easiest guy to get along with. And,
John butted heads with everybody.
Yeah. And so I was not a fan of John's, but I wasn't in San Francisco, so I didn't have that need to be his friend or worry about what he booked or what he did. I think what you brought to Kiki really gave Cobb's an opportunity to make itself the foundation of stand-up in that area. Now, you were just booking in the beginning. Didn't you become a co-owner?
I became a co-owner with my ex-wife.
Okay.
It wasn't my ex-wife at the time. So what happened was we bought the club from the owner. He was burnt out and had enough. He just didn't want the nightclub life anymore. And we purchased the club from him and the name. And then we moved. And basically, the club was losing its lease on Chestnut Street anyway. It was being sold to the Cow Hollow Inn. And so our spot was going to be knocked down. Our building that we were in was going to be destroyed. So we bought the name and the liquor license, and then proceeded to look for a new location. And we found one in the Cannery and Fisherman's Wharf. And it was a perfect spot. It was just a great location, not only because we had parking, which in San Francisco is really rare, and we also were able to team up with Ice Cream Paula, which became a restaurant shortly after, and so we could have minors in and expand our audience that way as well. So we had more seats, twice as many as we had, twice as many as the capacity was on Chestnut Street. We were allowed to have people younger than 21 in the building. It was a magical place. It really, and we exploded. It was just
right. How many seats did Cobb's have when it moved to the Cannery?
200.
Yeah, that's like the perfect size room. Because I had a chance to visit Cobb's on Chestnut once, but the place that I went more than other, and this was back when I was trying to find acts and kind of learn my way in the business, but it was the Cannery Row location. And it was, like you said, it was the perfect size room. It had great ambiance. There was some history in the building. And really, what made it a success in my mind for you and your ex-wife was you, as a stand-up comic and starting at the original Cobb's on Chestnut, started building relationships, and you ended up being an important part of the career of so many comics that people now know, somewhat famous, the Dana Carveys, Robin Williams, Arj Barker, Bobcat Goldthwait, it goes on
Jim
and on.
Carey, Bill Maher, Ellen DeGeneres.
Yeah, there's been so many. So, but I think that what you and your ex-wife got to bring to the Cannery Row location really set Cobb's Comedy Club at this point. It wasn't Cobb's Pub. You changed it to Cobb's Comedy Club, and really became one of the Hallmark clubs of Northern California. At what point did you decide, that, I mean, you ran it differently. Instead of a 3-act format, you were doing still more of a showcase club, correct?
No, it was a 3-act format for the most part. We only had one showcase night a week, but we weren't an open mic club. I kind of detested open mics. I did them at the Chestnut Street location, and I just didn't have much tolerance for people who would go on stage and not know what they were doing. So I made a format called the All Pro Comedy Showcase. We later extended that to Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, but that might be where you're thinking of the club was a showcase, because it was a showcase club for 3 nights of the week, and 4 nights it was a regular
a headliner room.
Headliner. It was just a regular headliner room for the most part.
Okay, so
in our peak, which we, when we had Jim Carey and Brian Regan and James Gould and God knows how many, George Wallace, Victorians, and all these people at their peaks, we were going 6 days a week with a headliner show and doing 3 shows on Saturday. So it was like about 9 shows a week that we were doing. So
wow, that's a lot of comedy, ladies and gentlemen. I tried to limit my shows to keep them fuller, but when you had the audience base of San Francisco, you could do that. And I think my confusion, Tom, was that I was dropping in to find talent and meet people on the showcase nights, because those were the nights I wasn't working my club. And I got to see a lot of great people there. But the headliner format, which I think is the most successful for a business, where you have an opening act, feature act, and a name headliner usually, it really is one that lends itself to the business side. Now, one of the acts that you had that I never got a chance to work with was Jim Carey. What was he like as a young comic?
Well, Jim was Jim was a family man at the time. He was just, actually, what's amazing is that he's just a regular guy. I was just on Adam Carolla's show, and he goes, "Oh, you had Jim Carey. Was he crazy? Was he like that crazy person?" I go, "No, he's like a regular dude. He's just, we would just talk and chat and have a great time." And I remember the first time I saw him, Rick Overton is one who recommended him to me, and I talked to his manager, Jimmy Miller, who now manages Judd Apatow and a ridiculous amount of crazy talented people. But I saw a tape of Jim, and I said, "I want this guy." And the first night I saw him at Cobb's doing a full set, I told him, I said, "I want you to be your gymnasium. I want you to be able to do whatever the hell you want here. I completely trust you that you're going to entertain the audience. So I want you to go out as far as you can. Don't be afraid to bust the windows, and don't be afraid to, turn this room upside down. It's your room. Have fun. I'm not even going to worry about you on stage." And it was just amazing. The stuff he was coming out with is the stuff that led him to get In Living Color. A lot of those characters that he did there were invented at Cobb's just by him experimenting and playing. And so it was an amazing time. And for, I think, about 3 years, he was playing the club at a month out of the year, every year.
Wow.
So it was.
As a club owner, you did something unusual, which is giving a particular act free reign on stage. And there's only a few people. Robin is one, and there's a few other that you could do that and get away with that. But giving Jim Carey that kind of freedom on stage, I'm sure was so helpful to his career and helping him develop the acts and characters that, as you said, made him a huge success and a movie star. But for you as a club owner, bringing it back to you, Tom Sawyer, making those kinds of decisions are so important, because you as the producer saw the talent that maybe wasn't viewable by everybody at the time. You mentioned two things that I wanted to expand on. One is that a lot of these guys that are a character on stage, Robin Williams, Jim Carrey, Johnny Steele, Bobcat Goldthwait, Slayton, when they're off stage, that's when I really enjoyed spending time with them, because they were, human, and they were more themselves off stage as opposed to on stage when it was kind of a character taking over.
And I think the 80s, actually the 80s time was definitely character driven, most of the 80s. And then later on, the people who were getting back to the same thing we were talking about earlier, which is being yourself. A lot of these guys were completely, you talk to Bill Burr off stage, that's Bill Burr on stage. Bill Maher's attitude is the same attitude that he has off stage. Good or bad or indifferent, that's the guy. So if you don't like Bill Maher on stage, you're probably not going to like him off stage. So I think that was that was like the interesting part of the 80s as opposed to the 90s and going into where we are today, is that idea of be yourself, be who you are. To me, the person in the 80s who was the most themselves was Paula Poundstone. Paula Poundstone was amazing in the fact that she's the same person. She's the same person now that she wasn't back then, because she's the same person off stage that she is on stage.
Yeah, it wasn't a character. It was her.
Yeah. And it's kind of the reason, at the time, I remember getting into a big fight with Bobcat Goldthwait, because I was saying, dude, don't be Bobcat. Be Bob Goldthwait. Start trying to transition away from that character, because you're going to get pigeonholed, and then it's all going to come down, because you're going to get stuck. Everybody gets stuck. Comedy's like a trick, and every comedian has X amount of tricks in their bag. And I think one of the reasons why you see a lot of comedians who have great movie careers, eventually those movie careers start to dissipate, is because we see them, they're amazing, we laugh at their jokes, and all of a sudden we stop laughing at their jokes, so we start realizing, hey, that's kind of like the joke you did in the last movie or the movie before that. And again, that's why the people who actually transition, to become, better than, better actors or having longer careers are the ones that transition away from stand-up, because, man, you eventually, when you're a character, that character goes, it just runs out of gas, So being yourself is so important.
Well, I think a good example of that is Kevin Pollack. He really recreated himself from the impressionist stand-up comic into the actor. It all kind of melded, but it was a good process. And you mentioned Paula. Coincidentally, you mentioned how you gave Jim Carrey freedom of the stage. I didn't quite give her that freedom, but Paula was the only act in my 20 plus years running a club that I let work multiple weeks in a row so that she could find herself and find her act. Now, this was back in 80, 81, but it was still just a coincidence, I guess. You did it with Jim Carrey, gave him the freedom of the stage. For me, it was Paula, letting her just work over and over and over. And people like Dana Carvey and Gary Shandling were giving her advice and helping her to find taking who she was and turning it into an act. I noticed you did a lot of work with people that we both spent time with, Tim Bedore, Joe Classic, Wil Durst, one of my favorite people in the world, Arj Barker. You were talking about people that were the same off stage and on stage. How about Bobby Slayton?
Definitely the same guy.
Same guy.
The same guy.
And even Johnny Steele, he's got an energy that just doesn't stop. These are all really good people that you helped get them going. Dana Carvey, for example, started back in those days and ended up with a great career.
Well, and Dana Carvey, it's like me and Kevin Pollack. When I was starting out in stand-up, I also did a lot of impressions, and those are actually the best part of my show, because I've been doing impressions since I was a kid, and it was really fun, especially with Dana and Kevin Pollack, and then later Frank Caliendo, to kind of jam and do our weird impressions, the ones can't do for audience because you have to spend so much time explaining who this guy is. Now, he played the senator in The Godfather. He's a third character in North Dallas 40. We still don't know who he is, so you don't bother doing those. But we all knew who those guys were, and it was always fun. It was sort of like jazz musicians jamming. And even Dana Carvey, every once in a while when I run into him, he's like, who are you doing that's new? He always wants to know, what new voice you picked up on. And so it's fun doing the weird impressions, the ones the audiences don't get, don't know right off the bat. So that's what we'd always share. We'd always share our new impression or something we're working on.
Well, I think that is so fun because first it explains your relationship with Dana Carvey and Kevin Pollack, because two great people that do impressions. And if you were following in that ilk, obviously you'd gravitate towards them and spend time with them. But I totally understand that backstage or after hours hanging out, playing with each other to find the characters, to work on them and get them sharp. Was there an impression that you can still do that was one of your early ones you want to share with the audience?
I did a little bit of it before, but I'll give you a story to do with this one. I was, Robin Williams was a regular, showed up regularly at the club. We probably played a month's worth of sets every year for almost 30 years. And one day I figured out how to do Robin's voice. So I was so excited to do Robin for Robin, because I thought it would be fun to do it. And so he comes to the club and he's like, "Hey, Chief." And I go, "Hey, how are you doing?" And he goes, "What?" I go, "Hey, it's really good to see you, man. I'm really enjoying looking forward to seeing you tonight." And he goes, "Don't do that." I go, "Don't do what?" And he goes, "Don't do that." And I was like, "Okie dokie." Okay. So you'll keep going on at about 11 o'clock. And even my old doorman, Pete Russell, we both looked at each other like, holy God, like both are, the way he said it was like deadly serious. And it was like, okay, all right, Mr. Williams. So I found out later on, interesting enough, when I started taking classes to be a voiceover actor, I took a class with somebody from Disney named Ned Lott, and Ned specializes in sound-alikes. And he works with Disney, and he's done Captain Sparrow, Jack Sparrow, and finding a voice for Johnny Depp and other characters in Disney films. And when it came to time to find somebody to sound like Robin to do Aladdin, he found a guy that was perfect, and he presented it to Robin, and Robin rejected it. And then they had a couple other actors that sounded pretty good, pretty close to Robin. Again, presented those two guys, rejected them both. They said, "Is there anybody you like?" He picked somebody that sounded nothing like him. They had to can all the sound-alike stuff for Robin, all the projects they had lined up. He doesn't like his voice. He doesn't like, some people think it's kind of an insult, that you're making fun of them. And I think Robin thought that, it was very odd because the nicest guy. Oh,
great guy.
Amazing person. And I think that's one of the things that, always remember about Robin, his ridiculous generosity, how he helped comics when they were ill, when they were in bad shape, financially. He helped us when we moved to Columbus Avenue. He helped us out financially in that location as well. Just ridiculously generous and caring. Wonderful person.
Yeah, but it's so funny. That's a great story, Tom, and thanks for sharing it. It's been known in show business that imitation is a compliment, and yet in the case of Robin, and I've heard this about a couple other people, they find it insulting, or they just are annoyed by it and don't like it. Then there was others like Johnny Carson that kind of thrived on it and loved people doing him. Yeah. So I think it's their perspective of what they're hearing. But the story about Disney and him turning down everybody until they found somebody that didn't sound like him is hilarious. Now, you've worked with a lot of what turned out to be some of the biggest names in comedy, and some of them were coming to the club when they were big names. Both of us had a good relationship with George Wallace, who is like Mr. Vegas, and a couple other people that were already pretty well known from the 70s. Was there anybody you had at the club or got to work with that you were maybe a little awestruck or had that star feeling?
I for some reason, for whatever reason it is, I don't really have that gene. And I think actually going back to Robin, he got it out of me in a weird way, because when he started showing up at Cobb's, I was trying to, make him feel comfortable or make him feel welcome. And he was treating me like shit. Right. So I went to Michael Pritchard, who everybody would go to in those days if they had an issue or problem, because he was like, he was like everybody's priest that would go see if we had a comedy issue.
Yeah, he was like the godfather of the Bay Area. Everybody, Michael Pritchard, look him up. You'll see he was a very funny guy.
Yeah, and so I said, Mike, he's always, I got a problem with Bob. He shows up, he treats me like shit, blah, blah. And he goes, what would you do with anybody else? I told him, I said, I would go tell him to go fuck himself. And he said, well, tell him to go fuck himself. And I went, really? He went, yeah, that's okay. And I went, okay. So next time he comes in, my go fuck yourself hat on already. And I didn't say it, but I was in that place, where I could say it. And he treated me wonderfully. And then I realized that from that moment on, that I was kind of awestruck. And that was probably annoying the shit out of him, and so I kind of kept that hat on for the rest of my life, which is like nobody's above being made fun of or poked fun at, or, I want to make people feel welcome, but I don't want to do it in a way that's condescending or kiss-assy or anything like that. And so I think the only person I really got awestruck with was I had Robin brought down Eric Idle, and I was a gigantic Monty Python fan, and I was a little wobbly in the knees when I met him. So that would have been.
That's awesome. Eric Idle, a legend, and Monty Python was so important to our generation as a comedy team. I'm not competing, but I once, talking about being awestruck and starstruck, I once had on my stage Graham Chapman.
Oh, wow.
Right. And it was literally weeks before he passed, sadly, but we had a chance to have him at the club for a week, and he told amazing stories, and just being a Monty Python fan, it was incredible for me. But Eric Idle, I think I would have been the same way. Okay, before I roll the closing credits, just a quick reminder, there's 3 parts to this interview. Part 2 is coming up next. And thanks for listening. Be sure to rate us and share us. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Stand-Up Comedy, your host and MC. For information on the show, merchandise, and our sponsors, or to send comments to Scott, visit our website at www.standupyourhostandmc.com. Look for more episodes soon and enjoy the world of stand-up comedy. Visit a comedy showroom near you.